So how likely is a repeat of a terror attack like 7/7 on British soil? Just 10 days ago, Iraqi intelligence officials emerged that terrorists from Islamic State have been plotting to carry out a large-scale atrocity in the United Kingdom, Iraqi intelligence officials have revealed. Well, joining me now to discuss this is Will Geddes, security specialist and CEO of threat management firm International Corporate Protection Group. Good evening to you, Will. Thank you for joining us. So I'd like to start. What is the current terror rating in the UK and how does that compare to normal?
Well, the threat level right now, Martin, is at substantial, which means that a terrorist attack is likely. Now, it's a sort of midway point between the highest and the lowest levels. So the security services and the anti-terrorism police and the various agencies, obviously, that contribute the intelligence that then forms this threat level are putting it at a very medium level. Now, this is evidently something that they have to be very conscious of and have been especially conscious of, obviously, since the tragic events of 7/7, when they underestimated the potential threat that was going to materialize. So since that time, the threat level has adjusted, and like any good threat level system, it needs to adjust because it will have no value to anybody if people can't see that it's fluctuating and understanding at times when they can be vigilant or when they should be vigilant, because nobody can remain hyper-vigilant at all times.
Will, we heard at the start of the show there that Tony Blair, in the immediate aftermath, just 10 days after the attack on 7/7, promised tough new laws to protect our borders and to deport known terrorists. Yet we know at the moment there are at least 19 terrorists in the UK who entered the country illegally via dinghies. Where did we go so wrong and where did we go so soft on terrorism?
Well, to be honest, I'm not involved in the legislation. Unfortunately, I pick up the pieces where that legislation falls short, and it certainly falls foul in terms of enabling individuals that can exploit and opportune by the weaknesses that there are in place. One of the biggest challenges, and I think one can't forget that the various agencies involved in not only the counter-terrorism efforts, but also those within the border force, have been trying incredibly hard to try and prevent, obviously, and curb the number of individuals that are illegally getting into the country. But one of the considerable risks is that there are not only those that innocently want to come and take asylum in this country, great country of ours, but there are inevitably going to be those with malintent who want to infiltrate back into the United Kingdom to carry out whatever actions they may choose. Now, the 19 that you mention is a very, very small percentage of those that are actually on the current watch list. And the constant challenge that the security services and counter-terrorism policing have is in prioritising who they believe could be the potentially greatest threat. So that list will adjust in terms of those subjects of interest that will be focused on. But as technology is enhanced and improved, and certainly that's come a long way in the last 18 years, we're now in a position where technology can take a good dominance in terms of intercepting communications, of identifying chatter, and certainly working with our partners overseas to try and find out what we can do to try and prevent those coming into the country that really do have terrorist intent.
OK, Will, let's cut to the chase here. We know there are 19, but they're the ones that have been fingerprinted previously in different countries. They just happen to show up on our system. We also know that some 98% of people arriving on our shores illegally via dinghies don't even have passports or any credible documentation to prove who they are. So let's be honest, we don't know who's coming in the country, and surely it stands to reason that if so many thousands of military-aged young men are coming in with no documentation of proof of who they are, then malicious intent must be there and the terror threat to Britain must be increased.
Well, yes, it would be, certainly in terms of those that are connecting with other individuals already established in the country, and very rarely will we see individuals that will then come into the country and try and establish a cell. Although that does happen, we do also have the lone actors, and we've seen many of those over the last 18 years. I mean, there have been 21 notable terrorist incidents since 7/7 in this country. However, the number that are thwarted by the security services and foiled at the very late stages of those plans have been considerable sight more than that. And certainly in terms of the notable ones, the disclosed one, there have been 15 disclosed major terrorist plots that have been foiled. But the concern, as you rightly say, is those that come into the country with no identification, that have been smuggled in, that have been able to establish themselves in this country. I think the greater risk, I think probably most people are concerned about, is general criminality. Now, that's not to diminish or dilute the terrorism aspect, because Islamic State are certainly a prevalent and more prominent threat than even Al-Qaeda are these days, certainly here in the United Kingdom. But it's the standard criminality, and quite often, again, joining the dots together, you will get many of those that commit terrorist acts that will have had a grounding in some low-level criminality beforehand.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, if we continue the strand of logic here, Will, if the threat to our peace and safety is increased because we don't know who's here, then all the politicians and the NGOs and the charities and the lawyers who facilitate the arrival and block the deportation of these individuals, are they exacerbating and increasing the UK's security threat?
I think they are, but I think where the complexities are is within the legislation and within the legal framework of human rights, and those that are entitled to a fair asylum. And I don't believe anybody is necessarily opposed to a fair asylum of someone who is going to come to this country and contribute in a positive way to the economy, to the community and everything else. Now, one of the things which has greatly enhanced, certainly since 2005, has been the various communities of those foreign nationals that have come over, that are embedded within their communities, are working with those communities, who are self-policing. Many of them are reporting those that have malintent to the authorities, and they're working collaboratively within this country as part of our nation to assist and ensure that those other individuals that maybe from their previous countries are not coming here and going to cause harm. So, you know, it's a complex situation. Yes, there are NGOs which are opposing deportations, but the grounds of those deportations are very flimsy in terms of some of those individuals that may be entitled. But also they're very flimsy in terms of the government in being able to extricate those individuals and send them back to their home nation, which probably those home nations in many regards are probably quite grateful to get rid of.
But surely if they're known terrorists with links to the Islamic State, I mean, what more evidence do you need to deport an individual back to their home nation?
Well, again, I agree with you entirely. And as to the legal frameworks, Martin, I'm probably not the best guy to ask about international law. My field is security. But certainly in terms of the resources that the security services and the counter-terrorism police have, you know, they can monitor these individuals to see whether they are undertaking preparations or planning or propagating any sort of propaganda for their particular agenda or their terrorism group. And ultimately, you know, it's those individuals that only once they've got that evidence, and in our fair and just legal system, which, you know, we're all potentially vulnerable to or protected by, depending on your perspective, they have to have that sufficient evidence to present to say this individual does have malintent, and they can, with justification, deport them. So it's a very complicated matter. I don't think I necessarily agree with it, Martin, as it currently stands, and I think you and I are like-minded in that regard. But we have one of the best legal systems in the world, but sadly it can be played against us.
And it seems to be toothless in the face of overriding evidence. One final question for you, Will, succinctly if you could. One of the clampdowns Blair promised was on radical Islamism that was poisoning mosques and young minds. With your ear on the ground from an intelligence perspective, how successful do you think that work has been, and how dangerous do you think the threat is from Islamist terrorists within the UK still to this day?
Well, that's two parts, Martin. I'll cover the first part, which is really in terms of the success in clamping down on radical Islamic groups. That, again, goes back to the point I was making earlier about those communities working hand in hand with the authorities to obviously report and assist and support any intelligence. And that's not snitching. It's simply saying there are individuals here who are going to tar us with the same brush. But on the second side, do we still face a threat? Absolutely, without a question. But it's not something that people necessarily have at the front of their mind every single day unless they see shows like this, which remind them that that threat does still prevail. So, you know, we're not out of the woods by any shape or form yet until we get some sort of process in place to ensure that those that do have a history and can be recorded and are documented from their home nations and have association to terrorist groups can be deported. That threat will prevail.
OK, thank you, Will Geddes. Thanks for having us on the show. We'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much.